Hey watch friends, today we're going to take a look at one from a big box here. This one is a Seiko SPB185. However, as is often the case with Seiko, since they do such a stellar job with their names, their fan base was kind enough to give some different names for this one. So this goes actually by many names. You'll hear it referred to as the Marine Master 200 or MM200, the Baby Marine Master, the SteelMaster, which is personally my favorite for this, and I think it's fitting for this 185 version. There is also, as we'll talk about in the video, a 187 version, which is the blue colorway for this. But before we get into that, I want to give you a preview, as I like to do, of a couple watches that we're going to be featuring on the channel here soon. As this one here on the left, this is the Vicaria Tuono, and I apologize if my pronunciation is probably awful there. And then this is the Call Multiverse. This one is actually live on Kickstarter right now as of recording. However, due to timing, because of the sensitivity, this video you're watching here might actually be preceding it. Or rather, I should say it might be preceding this video. Therefore, if you check my channel feed, you'll see if this one's already live on there. So let's go ahead and jump in, as we always do, and knock out initially the specs. So overall, this is kind of interesting with this one. Specifically, coming right from the 3 o'clock to the 9 o'clock, this is going to come in at 42 millimeters. But one thing that's important to note is this does have, as you can see here with the flare, a shrunken down bezel. So the bezel on this is actually coming in at 40.5 millimeters. The reason why that's interesting is it puts it somewhat squarely in the category of it's sort of a 42, it's sort of a 40. So we'll take a look at a couple comparisons, both 42 and 40, so you can get an idea as to how this might size up for you. For lugs, I would say lugs are more in line with what you'd expect for a 40. This is coming in at 20 millimeters, so it's kind of right in the middle again, size-wise, with those contours, but we'll look at that in detail. The lug to lug is coming in at a very reasonable 48.5, so not the shortest in the world, but certainly plenty adequate for smaller wrists as well. This one does, however, have male end links. If we can get that camera to focus there, those polishes are throwing this off. You can see those end links sticking out on the side. This one isn't a terrible protrusion though, so this is just coming in at 51.6, including the end links for the lug to lug distance. Overall thickness is, on my calipers, coming in at 12.6 millimeters. And then if you include that logo on the back there, that, if you can see, is actually raised. And that bumps it up to 13.25, so 13.25. But I didn't include that because, to me, that's going to tuck right into your wrist. You're not going to feel that. The actual measurement's the outside one, which is 12.6. All right, for the crystal, I noticed on Seiko's website, for whatever reason, they have this listed as a curved crystal. However, I cannot see even a hint of curve to that, so I'm calling this a flat sapphire crystal, and this is a sapphire crystal, not the typical hard Lex or mineral crystal as Seiko often puts on. This is their mid-range series here, so it does get bumped up to a sapphire. This does have a nice beveled edge to it, as you can see there. Really attractive, I like that, and as we saw from the side view, it's pretty much spot on with flush with the bezel. Maybe sits a hair proud, but not very much so. And then this does have an inner AR coating. For the movement on this isn't going to be your typical 4R35 or NH35 type movement. This is actually the upgraded 6R35. So what comes with that? You're still going to have a low beat movement for this. So it's going to come in at 21.6 thousand or 21,600 beats per hour or vibrations per hour, however you want to characterize it. So it's going to be the same basically as like your NH35, which we've featured a lot on the channel. One area where this really differs, though, is it does actually bump up to a 70-hour power reserve, up from, I believe, about 40, if I recall correctly, 40 or 42 on the NH35. It does still, of course, have hacking and hand winding, so as you pop out the crown there, winds in the first position. As you pop it all the way out to the second position, it will stop the second hand. Regulation on this is going to be a little tighter. The stated specs are -15 up to +25. So a decent range. Certainly I hope that they're regulating better, and from most of the feedback I've seen, they are regulating these better, but that's the stated for the movement itself. The water resistance, as you might have guessed from the moniker of MM or Marine Master 200, as opposed to the original, which was Marine Master 300, this is has 200 meters of water resistant, or 20 atmospheres, however you like to describe it there. The weight on this bracelet, and this is sized to my 6.5-inch wrist, and while we're doing that, let's go ahead and get an initial preview on the wrist. This is coming in at 167 grams. So certainly it is not a light watch by any means. Feeling it in hand, I actually expected that it was going to be a little heavier. Feeling it on wrist, I expected it was going to be a little bit lighter. So this is one, as we'll talk about for wear characterizations, it really wears well. It hugs to the wrist. It's very comfortable, and accordingly, I think that hides a lot of that weight. So you can absolutely feel this. This is one to me where people describe oftentimes that they like to feel a watch to know it's on the wrist. This is one that characterizes that. It doesn't feel heavy, it doesn't feel unbalanced or unwieldy, but it does feel like it has some heft to it, and certainly the build construction is very stout as well. As far as accessories, I'm going to go ahead and pop up on the screen here. This is actually a loaner to the channel from a subscriber and personal friend. So I just received pictures to cut down on shipping cost for this. It's your typical, if you've ever had a Seiko before, it's your typical Seiko packaging. You get the box, the pillow, those kind of things with it. Nothing to write home about, but it's adequate. For the warranty on this is going to come standard with a 2-year warranty, and in terms of accessories, it does just come on this bracelet. I don't believe it comes with anything else other than the items we just mentioned there. Now let's go ahead and look at some of the actual characteristics beyond the specs and see what this one is like to live with. So the first thing, of course, we always like to start on the dial. Right off the bat, you can see on this 185, this does come with a black dial. And I'm going to try to play around, and of course, we'll get outdoor footage like we always do. But you can see how this does shift, but one thing you'll notice, this does not take on the charcoal hue that you get from a lot of matte black dials, which this is, of course, a matte black, as you can see there. No sunburst or fume or anything along those lines going on. But with this, one thing that I found is it gives a really deep presence. It seems almost, it reminds me kind of like of the Vanta Blacks and those things where it just absorbs all light. This really gives off a lot of black vibe to it. And I think part of that is because it's so set off by being surrounded by all stainless and having the polished markers we'll talk about in a moment. But it really adds to the deepness of the black, and I like that a lot. This one does not have a rehot going around, as you might expect for a typical Seiko, and accordingly, we don't have any misalignment issues between the markers, the bezel, and the rehot there. So this does, for a chapter ring, just have the simple markers on the exterior, which I like and I think complements this well. It does, of course, as you can see here, have a date at the 3 o'clock position, and this obviously is not a color-matched date wheel. The white, though, does kind of complement with the markers of having somewhat of a whitish color on those Luma Bright that we'll talk about in a second. For the dial text, of course, your typical Seiko logo there, and then this with being the Prospect series, I would call it typical Prospect marking for that. I would say it's pretty clean, doesn't really clutter up the dial too much, but it does have that extra line of text compared to many where it just has the 2-line. So obviously Prospect symbol, automatic, and then we have the 200. And that, of course, as always, I believe is ISO certified for any of the Prospect series, so you know you can trust in the water resistance. Switching over to the markers, this one comes with really highly polished, gorgeous markers against this black. And I know I've seen people complain before about the application where it's almost like a sticker loom application where it's actually raised up above with those as opposed to being filled in like many indexes are. I personally really like it, and I think it adds some interest to these markers that which otherwise might be a little plain if they were completely flat. It gives some 3D, some depth, and the contrast of those pop-ups and that shine there with the polish on the exterior, I think looks really cool. As far as the handset, let's look at that hour and minute hand here. I would call this as kind of like a modified Dauphine style handset. You can see, of course, that crease down the middle, heavily polished, and then obviously the Lume application. And this, of course, being a Seiko, is Luma Bright on everything. You can see Lume. I believe the pip is going to be Luma Bright as well. It looks almost like a tritium vial, but I believe that that's just Luma Bright there. So transitioning over then with the second hand, I've heard many people refer to this as a shovel, which I think is an apt description, so I'm going to go ahead and stick with it and call that a shovel style second hand. And of course, you do have the 2-color contrast. Really like that aspect. So during day for visibility, especially up on this black, and then with having all the white accents and the stainless, having that little red marker there really helps to easily draw your eye quickly, whether it's day or night, to that second hand. So great legibility. And of course, the length on these, the second hand, you can see, rides right over, and then you have here with the minute hand, that's coming right up and touching, and then the hour hand, nice fat, and it gives clear representation there too. So excellent legibility overall. Looking at the bezel, this is going to be, of course, as a dive watch, a unidirectional bezel. This is 120 clicks. This does come with a stainless steel insert, and I believe the 187, despite being blue, is a stainless steel insert on that one as well. That one is just coated with that, whereas this is, of course, just a raw stainless. I was unable to confirm whether this has the super hard coating on that or not. As we'll talk about in a moment, the rest of the watch does. I will say this one, again, being used, does have some light scuffs on it. Nothing bad, nothing to write home about, but it definitely will take marks on. Not sure if the camera's picking that up or not, but you can see them around that position in person. For the bezel, it does have, for the text here, the only loom spot is going to be on the pip. The rest of this is just a nice black, very legible, clean font, and I think that adds for the overall finishing and aesthetic there. Let's go ahead and listen to this action. It's typical Seiko. You know, it has what I would describe as soft. It's deliberate. It's easy to grab a hold of. It's certainly easy to turn, and most importantly, you do see it has that perfect alignment there. I had to take it off camera. It's always hard to see alignment on camera because of the angles, but you have that perfect alignment for all that. So it's a soft, it's typical for Seiko action, but it works well and it gets the job done. For the case, I just gave a spoiler a moment ago. One of the biggest claims to fame with this is it does have their super hard coating for that, which is what Seiko refers to as their hardened coating. One of the things I want to look at right off the bat, and I'm going to talk about this a fair amount, is the finish here. You can see this polishing, so you've got really clean brushing accents, very, very well done, very impressive, looks very expensive, very nice all the way around. But the thing that gets me, and I apologize, I'm getting these fingerprints on it, but this polish is flawless. It is absolutely gorgeous all throughout. Everywhere where there is polish applied, it takes on just a stunning, stunning look to it. I can't see any imperfections. You get minimal distortion. It actually reminds me, and please don't flame me for this, it reminds me of kind of a baby Grand Seiko here as far as the finishing touches for this. It's a lot of what I think you would expect in a much cheaper watch, so certainly this might not be quite on par, but I think it looks darn good for what it is, and especially when we talk about the price, you'll see why. As far as the overall finishing, again, you do have, as you go throughout, you have nice changes, whether it be looking at the lugs, that carries around with the polish. Here down at the edge, you get just that nice little lip of a brushing. So really nice with mixing that up and keeping it interesting throughout the entirety of the case. Additionally, you might have noticed as we looked at the side, this is of course have a nice curvature to it, so it will fit comfortably on the wrist. And then additionally on the outside here, you can see this does have drilled lugs. So that's a welcome change for if you're ever wanting to put a different strap on this, that will be very easy to do. Switching over to the crown, you can see the crown here is unsigned. This is measuring in at 6.4 millimeters. It is just an overall, it fits, I think, the clean aesthetic for this. It sticks out far enough, and it's, of course, around the 4 o'clock position. It sticks out far enough that it is not going to impede your wrist. It's easy to grab a hold of. All the way around, I think it is a well-done application here with the crown, or well-done choice for the crown. This is, of course, as you'd expect for a dive watch, a screw-down crown, as is the case back that we'll look at here in a moment. The knurling is nice, easy to grip onto, and it, of course, is 2 positions here with having the date window at the first position and then adjusting it again with the hacking for the second position. Looking at the case back, you can see, and I'm sure we have fingerprints all over this, but it is a nice mix of polish here on the lip, and then you have a nice brushing in the middle. Then you have this raised, as we looked at earlier, logo, and that, of course, is polished as well, as you can see there. So it's a nice, clean finish. It fits comfortably on the wrist. No hot spots to report on the case back or anything there. And then you can, of course, see just typical, nice, clean Seiko text. Obviously, a sapphire crystal. We talked about the movement, all those things. You can see all that for verification in case you thought I was making it up. All right, so now looking at the bracelet. The bracelet here is going to come in again at 20 millimeters, consistent with the lugs. This does taper down to 18 millimeters. One of the things that I'm hoping you can pick up reasonably well, this bracelet, just like I mentioned with the case, is absolutely gorgeous as well. This comes in, it has brushing on most of the surfaces, but on the inside you get polish, and of course that's dirty down in there, but it is a nice mirror polish, and on the edges you get a polish to that as well. So it's really tasteful touches for that. As we talked about with the end link, this does come down. It curves off nicely, so even though it is a male end link, you can see it doesn't come that far out, and it has a nice taper to it, and I think flows well overall, so I don't mind that they didn't go with a female end link for that. Looking at the clasp, this clasp has much larger fold over than you would often have. Very easy to grip, very positive, very nice action. Really like that quite a lot. And then, of course, just a typical double pusher, scissor clasp, milled, of course, as you would expect for a watch of this caliber. For micro adjustments, this does have 4 micro adjustments, and then as I'm sure you would expect for Seiko, this is going to be a pin style adjustment here, so you can see the little arrow there. So this is not going to have screws, it's going to be the typical Seiko pin and collar. All right, so now that we've looked at that in some detail, I had mentioned we'll check this out for comparison. So one of the things that I noticed about this is with that coating, it almost takes on some of the warmth, especially on those polished accents, takes on some of the warmth of a titanium. So here we have, we'll look at size comparison in a moment, but this actually takes on and it has somewhat of that warmth and gunmetal color hue like you would have on titanium, which I think is pretty cool for this being stainless. You can see it's not exactly the same. It still does have some of the stainless coloration, but to me, it is a little more warm than this over here, which is just a straight stainless. But looking at the size, let's go ahead and get this in the middle here. So you can see on the left, this is the Swordfish in the 42, and then on the right, this is the Zello Swordfish in the 40 millimeter, and you can find both of those on the channel as well if you'd like to check out reviews. But you can see how this compares overall. I would say it's somewhat smack dab in the middle. In some respects, it's a little closer to the SF40 if you look at the dial and some of those features, but then when you look at the overall presence, I think it's pretty similar to this 42 millimeter version here. And then if you look at the case shape, one of the reasons I compared it to these is it does have some minor similarities. Many people compare the Swordfish to the Samurai, which I think is a closer comparison, but I do think this is reminiscent as well. So that gives you an idea of what this looks like size-wise. Now let's go ahead and take a look at this in some outdoor shots, and then we'll take a look at that Lumibrite and see if that holds up to Seiko's reputation for solid lume. I don't know about you, but I definitely wouldn't have expected this much playfulness from simple black dial and stainless steel. As I move this around here, you can see it really picks up the glint, especially love that polish on the side of the case. Really adds accent and pop, and it just has intrigue. Across the board, as it changes lighting, especially in indirect lighting, you really, for some reason, get an extra pop from not only the bezel, but also that beveled edge on the crystal itself. Transitioning over now to the lume, you can see certainly if you're looking for pop, this one definitely has you covered. Seiko did not skimp on applying their Lumibrite here. I would say it glows pretty similar to a C3, maybe a slightly different hue than that, a little less green than C3, but I would say that's been typical with my experience with Lumibrite. But you can absolutely see the hands, of course, are heavy application, and then the second hand moving around there, nice clear as well, and then even at the 3 o'clock position, that little marker is a nice touch. Alright, so there you have it. Now that we've taken a look at all those different features, you get an idea, hopefully, of what this feels like, what it's really like to live with this watch. But let's, like we always do here, let's go ahead and look at some of the positives, some of the things that I would have as critiques or negatives, and then have the overall summary. So first off, I would say, as I've talked about throughout this video, the overall finishing is just fantastic. The attention to detail, the brushing, the polishing, everything I think is exceptionally well executed. Very impressed. I think this is Seiko done right. Surprisingly, this one, despite the fact that it is just a simple black and stainless, has a really striking appearance. I find throughout the day, and I did not expect this, I just want to look at it. It doesn't have a lot, if you're looking at the specs or looking at a picture, going on for it. It's just a basic matte black dial. It just has stainless for the hardware and the accents, but it really comes together nicely, has pop, and it's just overall alluring. So I do like that quite a lot. Additionally, as I mentioned earlier, this does wear lighter than you'd expect. The specs in on-wrist feel are kind of different. It weighs in fairly hefty. In the hand, it feels hefty, but on the wrist, it feels really just pretty darn nice. So I like that about that a lot as well. And then similarly, the comfort is excellent, with one caveat for that, and we'll talk about that here in just 1 second. Alright, so overall, there's a lot to like about this watch. So what are some of the things that I dislike? Comfort. The only comfort flaw that I have, and this is for every Seiko that I've ever had on wrist, this does have a dive extension. And that dive extension for me, I'll pop up a picture. You can see how much of a hot spot that is for me. It does not agree with my wrist. They never have and probably never will. So that's something that's definitely in the con category there for me. If they don't bother you and you're fine with others, this I've found to be no different than any other Seiko. It does have nice articulation. I just really wish they'd lose that. Give me standard links. I don't need the dive extension, and all it does is create a hot spot and make for a lack of comfort for me in that respect. Everything else is great. The date window. Personally, this is one where I go back and forth on. Ordinarily, I prefer a color match date window. I somewhat put this in the critique category of I do think it's a nice finishing touch, but with the overall theme and aesthetic, I do actually kind of like the symmetry that you get from the white date window, so that's one that I'm honestly kind of neutral on. Similar to that, we'll talk about here is the price. The price of this one, which we hadn't talked about yet, is $1,200. So if you're thinking Seiko, you're thinking budget watches potentially, of course, obviously they have a huge range, but I know many people think of Seikos on the cheaper side. I don't think that's the case anymore. I don't think it always has been the case, but that's how they kind of build a lot of their name. This one at $1,200 certainly is not cheap, but as we'll talk about here next, I do think that it does give you a fair amount for the money. So where does that leave us? Overall, as far as summary for this one, in my personal opinion, I think that this is a great everyday watch. I think it is thin enough, it's comfortable enough, it's attractive enough that it works great as a casual watch, as an everyday, in general, beater. Whether you're actually diving with it or not, I think it's a good all-around watch. Similarly, I think that this is some of Seiko's best. I think this is extremely well executed. The attention to detail, the quality control, the overall finishing, everything is pretty darn spot on, and I like that a lot. Overall value, of course, as we just talked about the 1200, you might be thinking, hey, that's really not bad for it, especially if you look at the original Marine Master, you're looking at about half the price. Or if you're looking at something more like a Samurai or something like that, you're thinking, heck, I could buy 3 of them for that price, so that's really on the high side. But I think overall for it, I do think you get your money's worth out of this. At the end of the day, whether you think it's a good value or not, I'll just summarize with saying I do think it's a darn good watch. I think it's extremely well done, and I've been exceptionally impressed with this as a whole. So I hope this video has been helpful for you if you are considering getting the 185 or even its counterpart, the 187 with the blue. If you do enjoy this video and you haven't already, please do hit that subscribe button. Stay tuned, a lot more content. And then additionally, if you found it helpful, please do hit that like button as well. Thank you. Appreciate it.